Welcome back to Swordman Josh Gaming. And though I'm not gaming tonight and you guys haven't seen me live for a while, um, I've been busy with life, but I wanted to bring you this deck tech. Some of you that have followed the channel know that there have been multiple challenges issued within my playgroup. The last challenge that was made was issued by me, and it was to break into a realm that we hadn't played in yet, and that was Pauper Commander. So there's a lot of different house rules for Pauper Commander. The one we went with was your commander could be any uncommon, and everything else in your deck had to be common. So based off of that, I had a desire to want to build a Blinky deck, and I should probably have taken this out of the sleeve. But it's based around the new Soulherder from Modern Horizons, and I'll read the text because this is so glary being in this hard case. But it's one white blue, so good old Azorius colors. Whenever it's a 1/1, so it doesn't seem wonderful there. But whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Soulherder. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So, based off of that skill ability, I went into the app that I use and just started looking for all of the enter the battlefield effects that I could find on creatures in white and blue, and spells, and built the best deck that I could. And needless to say, my deck reigned supreme over the rest of them. It was pretty hard to stop. It had multiple different ways of keeping itself alive and gaining incremental value. So the games were a little longer, but it was an incremental value gain deck. So it wasn't like I could kill somebody in like turn 3 or something. It wasn't a fast deck. Sorry, my cat's trying to get on my desk. No. So let's go through what. So this is since it's Pauper. There's a considerable stack of creatures here, but also I needed a considerable stack of creatures to be able to spam ETB effects, and I have a lot of spells that spam that as well. So the first card that I used, I needed to find a couple of ways to protect my commander. I found a couple of them in the enchantments, and then of course I can flicker my own commander, but if you flicker your commander out, it loses all of its +1/+1 counters, so I didn't want to do that very much. So I needed a couple ways to protect my commander. So the first way I was going to do it was with Elgod's Shieldmate. So a blue and 3 for a 2/3, which seems pretty horrible until you read the rest of it, that it has Soulbound, and as long as it's paired with another creature, both creatures have hexproof. So this completely protects my commander from spot removal, and it worked out great. It won me multiple games just because of the hexproof. The next card, since it is a little bit running slower of a deck, I ran Stonehorn Dignitary, which is a white and 3, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent skips his or her next combat phase. I was guessing that this being Pauper, most decks would be combat centric. So I put this guy in here. He also has a pretty big butt. He's a 1/4, so he's a good blocker. But you can flicker this every single turn with Soulherder and constantly make it so somebody can never attack you, which can shut down, well, both decks that I played against. They, of course, required combat damage to win. It's pretty hard to get an infinite combo in Pauper. I'm sure there are some, but next one is Floodgate. Pseudo removal, being since a lot of my cards are blue. It's a blue and 3 colorless. It's a 0/5 wall. If it gains flying, bury it. Shouldn't be a problem. And if it leaves play, it deals to each non-blue creature without flying 1 damage for each 2 islands I control. So if it leaves play, it can also be if it gets flickered by Soulherder. So if you ever needed to take care of a bunch of weenies out on the battlefield, you can constantly flicker this every single turn to take care of a token Pauper deck, for instance. And I'll get into some more powerful cards here in a second. Skidding Surveyor, this is one of the ones that I use to go pull basics for mana fixing. It's just simply an artifact for 3 mana. And when it comes into play, you can search your library for a basic land card and then put it in your hand. So you can constantly ramp out after you get 3 mana and you have Soulherder on the board with this little guy and never miss your land drops. Now we have all of our bounce creatures. So there's a whole suite of creatures that are at common level that when they enter the battlefield, and the most common one that most people know, of course, is Mana War, bounces one of your opponent's creatures. So with this deck, the way it's set up with the instants and the sorceries and the Soulherder, on a good turn, you can bounce 3 to 4 creatures back to somebody's hand. But of course, the first one is Mana War. Bounces a creature back to an owner's hand for a blue and 2 colorless. It's a 2/2. We have Mistraven, which is the same exact thing, except it's 2 blue and 2 colorless, and it adds flying, so it has a little bit of evasion. We have a big beefy with Aether Snipe for a blue and 5 colorless. It's a 4/4, but it has an evoke cost for 2 blue and a colorless. So the interesting thing is, if you cast this for the evoke cost, and then you can immediately flicker it with one of your instant spells, then you can, granted, you're saving, you could possibly save a mana, because you can do that for 4 mana. Well, you can save 2 mana, 4 mana versus 6, and get him on the board. We have Academy Journey Mage. It costs 1 less if you have a wizard, and it bounces. It's a 3/2 for 5 also. And the creature types do matter in this for one very important enchantment, which I'll get to. So I did have to pay attention to that. So there are quite a few wizards in here. And then we have the Separatist Void Mage, which is also a wizard. And it also is a bounce for a blue and 3. Then we have the Exclusion Mage, which is a wizard. It's a bounce for a blue and 2. You get the hint here. Now we have our draw cards. So we needed to be able to draw through our deck to keep our synergies going and keep our value up. So the first one is Seagate Oracle for a blue and 2. And when it comes into play, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. So every single turn you get to dig 2 deep. Next one's just straight up draw with Skyscanner. It's a 1/1 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Merchant of Secrets is the same way. Blue and 2, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. This one's the opposite. It's Thalicos Seer for 2 blue. It's a 1/1 shadow, so it does have a lot of evasion on it. And when it leaves play, draw a card. So when you flicker it, instead of an ETB, it's a leave the battlefield effect, but it still works the same way. We have Muse Drake, a blue and 3 for a 1/3 flyer, so it works as a decent wall. And when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Pondering Mage from New Horizons, 3/4 for 3 and 2 blue, and it basically has a brainstorm type effect on it. You look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back on in any order, and then you draw a card. So not brainstorm, but ponder. Thus Pondering Mage. Have a couple more creature creators in here. We have Sensor Splicer. Seems really bad for 1 white and 4 for a 1/1, and it comes with a 3/3 Golem Buddy. And all Golem creatures you control have Vigilance, but when you start flickering him every single turn, that Golem army becomes very large very quick. The next one that I decided to put in here, because I thought the Golem idea and the Golems having Vigilance was pretty cool, I pulled out Irregular Cohorts from New Horizons, 2 white and 2 colorless for a 2/2. And when it comes into the play, it comes with a 2/2 buddy as well, but the interesting thing is they're changelings, so they're golems. So while the Sensor Splicer gives all your golems vigilance, that means that everything, all the changelings with irregular cohorts are also changelings, and anybody who's playing tribal in Pauper, most of those, I think all of the tribal commanders at uncommon are like all vampires get +1/+1, or it's actually all other vampires except for that card get +1/+1, or all other merfolk get +1/+1. So it scales with anybody else who's played a tribal Pauper commander deck. So that combination worked out great. And then if we're going to be making so many creatures and flickering so many times, the good old Soul Sister comes in to gain a little bit of extra life. And then also, just because our commander gets a +1/+1 counter on it every single time, we might as well maximize the flickering. So I found this little gem while I was looking through my cards. I didn't find it in my searches, but it's Salt Skidder. And it's 1 white and 3 colors for a 3/4, which is fine. But when another creature comes into play, remove Salt Skidder from the game. So everything that says remove from the game has been errated to basically mean exile. And then Salt Skidder returns to play under your control at end of turn, which is interesting because that means if you flicker a different creature with Soulherder, that creature flickers, then Salt Skidder flickers out, and then they both flicker back in. So Soulherder gets 2 +1/+1 counters rather than 1. And it's also for 1 white and 3 colorless for a 3/4. It's a great creature to just have around. And if we're going to flicker with a Soulherder and get that bonus, I found this interesting little card while I found a lot of these cards. I just dug through all of my cards because all my commons and uncommons are separated differently. And then after I had a good base, I think I probably had 200 cards, I started down selecting. But I found this gem as well. It's almost the same thing as Soulherder, except it doesn't have that extra line of text being able to do the flickering. But this is whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on 9th Bridge Patrol. So, as Soulherder gets bigger, every single time Soulherder would get a +1/+1 counter, 9th Bridge Patrol will get one also. So he can grow really big really fast. And now we have, and I didn't think this was possible easily within Pauper either, we have Graveyard Recursion. So a lot of these cards back here towards the back are different ways to get cards back out of our graveyard. So the first one, which I did know about, was Archaeomancer. And when it enters the battlefield, return an instant or sorcery card from the graveyard to your hand. Then we have Custody Squire, which I found, which I was never knew much about this Will of the Council stuff, but this is Will of the Council. It's a 3/3 flyer. And when it enters the battlefield, starting with you, it's a voting card. Each player votes for an artifact, creature, or enchantment card in your graveyard, and return each card with the most votes or tied for the most votes to your hand. So while it doesn't guarantee you to get what you want out of your graveyard, it does always get you something back out of your graveyard. Our next is Mnemonic Wall. It's a 0/4 defender. I mean, it's a wall. But when it enters the battlefield, you can return an instant or sorcery card from the graveyard to your hand. The next is Monk Idealist, which will return an enchantment card. Then we have Salvager of Secrets, which will return an instant or sorcery. We have Heliod's Pilgrim. So these next couple are searches. Oh, these are enchantment based. Okay, we have Aromancer, which when it enters battlefield, return an enchantment from the graveyard to your hand. Then we have a couple of search cards here. Oh, we got one more graveyard to hand. Ironclad Slayer. When it enters the battlefield, return an aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. I don't have any equipment cards, but I do have auras. And we'll get into those in a second. Then we have a couple of search cards. Heliod's Pilgrim, finally. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an aura card and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And the aura cards are all removal cards as well. So that's great. And then Totem Guide Heartbeast. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an aura card. Same thing as Heliod's Pilgrim, except it costs more because it's a 2/5 versus a 1/2. So let the ETBs roll. Now, besides Soulherder, we have to have other ways to trigger these ETBs so that way we can get more value and we don't just fall behind. Because if somebody takes out Soulherder, then we're in dire straits. So how else are we going to do this? Well, let me stack these creatures up here. And if you guys want a creature count, I'll give it to you real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 31 creatures, including the commander. But how are we going to deal with if our commander's not in play? Well, there's a bunch of different ways. First, I have one more return to the graveyard. That's in Resurrection. 2 white, 2 colors. Return target creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield if one gets knocked out. There's this, and there's one enchantment that allows me to get creatures back from the graveyard. But we have a bunch more bounce spells and exile spells within our spell suite. So our first instant is either Trade Winds, return target permanent you control, and target permanent you don't control to their owner's hand. So this allows you to bounce a card, any card you want, to their hand, and you bounce one of your cards. Let's say it's a Mana War, then you can replay that Mana War and bounce something else. So you can get a double bounce out of this card. Our only counterspell in the deck, counterspell would actually run better. However, I didn't have a counterspell available. They're all in decks, so I ran Fairy Trickery. But it does have a bonus to it that it counters a target non-fairy spell. So if you're playing against Fairy Tribal, it's not going to work at all. But if the spell is countered, remove it from the game. So you exile it instead of putting it in their graveyard. Now that doesn't put +1/+1 counters on Soulherder, because that's only from the battlefield or from 9th Bridge Brigade. But it does keep everybody's graveyard clear if you can play this. And with everything we have to bring back instants from our graveyard, we can play this over and over and over again. To go get our stuff, we have 1 copy of Merchant Spell. You can go get a blue instant or interrupt, which interrupt doesn't exist anymore, but you can go get a blue instant. Great Homelands common tutor. We have Ray of Command at instant speed for blue and 3. Untap target creature opponent controls and gain control of it until end of turn. That creature can attack or use abilities that require a tap. And then when you lose control of the creature, tap it. Now, I'm not sure if this works this way, but I think it does, where if you Ray of Command a creature, you get control of it, and then you exile it. When it comes back in, it comes in as a new creature, not as the creature that left. So that means that if you steal an opponent's creature, and then you exile it because it's now yours, and it comes back, you keep that creature permanently. So then if you reoccur Ray of Command from your graveyard, and then you can exile again at instant speed, you can take all of their creatures as well. We needed, here's some more protection for our commander. All the exile cards are at the back of this. The first one to protect our commander is Mizium Skin. It's just basically +0/+1 and hexproof, but for an overload of 1 colorless and 1 blue to do it for all your creatures. So great protection. Next protection spell, Blessed Breath. So a lot of this stuff is protection from spot removal. I expected more spot removal than I did mass removal within the Pauper format. So Blessed Breath is basically target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, but it does have splice into Arcana. So you can splice it into any arcane spell and then be able to put this back into your hand. We have Stave Off, which is the same thing. Target creature gains protection of color of your choice. We have Apostle's Blessing, which is the same thing, except it can protect an artifact as well. Then we have God's Willing, same thing, protection from a color of your choice, and it includes Scry 1. Next bounce spell is Capsize. 2 blue and 1 with a 3 buyback. Return target permanent, so you can start bouncing their lanes if you've bounced all their creatures and you have nothing left to do with your mana. Now we have our exiles, so we got a whole exile suite here. We have Displace. Exile up to 2 target creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. So you get to, let's say you bounce a Mana War and an Archaeomancer. Well, both of those come in. They bounce out, they bounce back in, you get both their ETB fit triggers, your Soulherder gets 2 +1/+1 counters, and you still have another bounce at end of turn from Soulherder, so it's going to get 3 +1/+1 counters in 1 turn. Next we have Siren's Ruse. A blue and a colorless, exile a creature card from the battlefield, return it under its owner's control, so you're going to do it again. If it's a pirate, you get a draw card. So the only way you can get a pirate with this is if you exile the irregular cohorts. It's the only pirate in the deck because it's a changeling, and you wouldn't want to exile one of your tokens because it exiles and poofs and disappears and never comes back. We have good old Ephemerate, which this one's great. So for 1 white, you get to do the flicker thing, but it also has rebound. So you can cast it from your hand and you exile it once it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost, and then it goes into your graveyard. So then you can recur it, so you can get, on a turn, you can cast Ephemerate. Next upkeep, you can have Ephemerate for free, and then you can bounce an Flicker an Archaeomancer, get Ephemerate back, cast it again before your turn comes back around again, and be able to constantly being able to exile your stuff and get all your value. Our next is Turn into Mist. Again, the same thing. It just exiles and it returns to the battlefield. Removal and for our opponents. So if we remove our opponent's creatures from the battlefield, our Soulherder still gets a +1/+1 counter. So Settle Beyond Reality, you get to exile a creature you don't control. So Soulherder will get a +1/+1 counter. And then you get to flicker a creature you do control. So it gets another +1/+1 counter. So there's 2 +1/+1 counters. We have Cloud Shift. Again, just simple. It's a flicker effect. We have Ghostly Flicker, which is 2 flicker effects in 1 card for a blue and 2 colorless. We have Teferi's Time Twist, which is a flicker, and if it's a creature, it enters with a +1/+1 counter. And then we have Momentary Blink, which is to exile. It's a flicker again, with a buyback of a blue and 3 colorless. So besides our commander, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more flicker effects that are in the instant category. I believe they are all instants. Nope, Settle Beyond a sorcery. Everything else is an instant. So with all of these instants, we can also protect any of our creatures from any removal that our opponents might have. So hopefully we have our commander protected by either Hexproof or Shroud, and then we can use all of these flicker effects to not only gain value but also protect all of our creatures. So that is our instants and sorceries pile. Now I told you that there were 2 creatures over here that let us go get auras and enchantments, so we'll go through those now. The first couple here are what I would consider removal. So the first one is Faith Fetters. It's an enchant permanent, so it's not necessarily even on a creature, it's on anything, but when it enters the battlefield, gain 4 life, and enchanted permanent can attack or block or activate abilities, unless they're mana abilities, so it'll shut down any creature on the board. Next is Repro Bation. It becomes enchant creature instead of enchant permanent. It loses all abilities and is a coward with base power toughness 0/1. And you notice aura. Here's our next one that's an aura. Deep Freeze. It's also an enchant creature. Enchanted creature has base power and toughness 0/4, and it's a wall because it has defender and it loses all other abilities. So our next one's an aura as well, so we can go search all of these. Kasmina's Transmutation. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and has base power toughness 1/1. More protection. Enchant creature. We can't go search this one out because it's not an aura, but you can play Ward of Lights as this if it's an instant. If you do, bury it at end of turn, but enchanted creature has protection of color from your choice, and that protection doesn't destroy Ward of Light. So if you give a creature protection from white, then Ward of Lights can still be on that creature, which is a nice little twist. I told you we had one other way of recurring creatures from the graveyard. That's Angelic Renewal. So it has to be in the battlefield when that creature gets removed. Then you can just sack Angelic Renewal and return it to the battlefield, that creature that died. And then we have all of our creatures that allow us to get enchantments back from the graveyard. So all of these enchantments we can recur from the graveyard. To protect our commander, we have Protective Bauble. So it's an aura. We can go search it out. Enchanted creature is unblockable and has Shroud, so it can't be targeted. And that's a foily, so nice and shiny there. One of our auras that we want to go get as soon as possible, if we can, is Steel of the Godhead. So it's our commander is both white and blue, so it gets both of these effects. It gets +1/+1 and has lifelink because it's white, and it gets +1/+1 and it's unblockable because it's blue. So then our commander is constantly getting bigger. It gets +2/+2 from this, and it has lifelink and it's unblockable, so you can kill somebody with commander damage easily. And then our last two are both auras that are removal, but they also are exile effects for our commander. So the first one is an enchant creature. It's Weight of Consciousness. So I told you that the fact that we had a bunch of wizards or a bunch of golems, that the actual type, creature type, mattered. This is one of the reasons it matters. So tap 2 untapped creatures you control that share a creature type. So those golem tokens are perfect. Remove enchanted creature from the game. So it's exiled. So our whole Soulherder will get a +1/+1. We tap 2 of our golems after we've attacked with them. We pardon me, exile it from the game, and then we can recur this back into our hand and cast it again and keep exiling all of their creatures as well. And then the last one is Choking Restraints. Instead of tapping 2, it does almost the same thing that Weight of Consciousness does. Enchanted creature, Weight of Consciousness is just can't attack. Choking Restraints is can't attack or block, but for 2 white and 3 colorless, you get to exile enchanted creature. This goes to our graveyard, we recur it. So these are all of our auras, except for a couple of enchantments and enchant creatures that we can go get. All of them are auras except for Ward of Lights and Angelic Renewal. So in regards to that, we can go search these up and take care of whatever board state we need. So we've gone through our creatures, we've gone through our instants and sorceries, all of our recursion, all of our enchantments, what we can go search out. So then the question is, what does it take to make this deck run? Running 2 mana rocks and only 2 mana rocks, because we should be able to search through and go through our deck and dig deep as quick as we can. Typically by turn 3, turn 4, we're starting to flicker things with Soulherder, so we start gaining value immediately. Pauper Commander seems to be a much slower format, so having something come out on turn 3 and start gaining value on turn 4 works great. But in terms of what we're running for mana rocks, I could have run a different mana rock, but I wanted to stay with New Horizons. It's Fountain of Ichor. So 3 colorless, tap for a mana of any color. And for 3, it can become a 3/3 dinosaur until end of turn. Really no reason to do that, except for if somebody wants to target this and we have the mana open, I guess we could technically turn it into a dinosaur and then bounce this or exile this card and have it come back into play, I suppose. Our other mana rock we're running is the Azorius Locket. So for 3, you can tap it for a white or a blue, and then for 4 Azorius, you can tap it and sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. We have no way of recurring artifacts in this deck. When we get in the later game, we have a couple cycling lands. We have Lonely Sandbar, and we have Secluded Steppe. This one I just threw in because I wanted to. It's Ancient Den. It's just a white plains. It can be replaced with the white plains. I just put it in here because I thought it'd be fun. But it's an artifact land. We have Azorius Guildgate. We have Tranquil Cove. Azorius Chancery, good old Command Tower, and then to make the rest of it run, we are sitting on 14 gorgeous Battle Bond Plains and 16 gorgeous Battle Bond Islands. So this is Soulherder. It was extremely strong, much stronger than I thought it was going to be. Actually to the point where I felt almost bad playing it against my play group, but they enjoyed seeing what Pauper could do. I enjoyed it as well, and I enjoyed the budget value of Pauper and the fun it was to create this deck. So I'll be doing more Pauper Commander decks in the future. I hope my play group will as well, because it's a very budget friendly way to do it. There's multiple ways that you can do Pauper Commander. of course, we did it with an uncommon commander, and everything else had to be common. And even though some of my symbols say they're uncommon, I did check everything to make sure it was a common. But there are some other house rules that are like, you can have up to 5 uncommons in your deck, or you can have 10 uncommons in your deck. Everything else has to be common. We went the furthest into the Pauper realm. And I think that's where I want to stay and see what else I can come up with. So if you like what you saw, leave a comment down below. If you want to see other Pauper commander decks or have ideas for Pauper commander decks, also leave a comment down below. I was thinking about the next one I might try to do would be, you guys have seen me have some, wow, my mind just went, aristocrat style Orzhov. I figured I might try, there's a uncommon vampire that's Orzhov colors, that's +1/+1 for all vampires. Might try that, but I think I want to try an aristocrat style deck next and see how it plays. But as always, I hope you guys liked this video. If you want to see more, like I said, leave a comment down below. Hit the subscribe button so you know when I stream or when I post videos. And as always, may Keep Calm Kitty always be with you. And have a wonderful week and a happy 4th of July.